Get ready! It's time for Motherhood Talk Radio, live on Toginet.com. Motherhood Talk Radio, starring Sandra Beck, is the most powerful voice in women's issues today. As the owner of Motherhood Incorporated, Sandra brings you inspiring, influential, and interesting resources to help you navigate everything from childcare to corporate formation. Motherhood Talk Radio features the powerful voices of Christy Hawley, Robin Boyd, Linda Franklin, Tracy Costin, Danny Kiernan, Susan Haid, and Lisa Dedress. Together, these women bring you everything from the latest crafting tips to how to be sexy in your 40s, from great parenting tips to moms living with cancer, and most importantly, how to bounce back with style. Motherhood Talk Radio helps you make a difference in your world and the world around us. Being all you can be starts right here, right now. Let's do it. Here is your host, Sandra Beck.
Hey girls, this is Sandra from Motherhood Talk Radio, and as promised, we're bringing another fantastic show to you this week. We're going to visit with Michele Gay. Now, Michele Gay is the co-founder of the organization Safe and Sound, which is a nonprofit foundation of Sandy Hook moms, dads, and community members who lost children, friends, and loved ones. And it also includes the rest of us whose hearts went out to Michele Gay, who did lose her daughter Joey in the Sandy Hook tragedy, and for every parent out there that felt along with her in the other Sandy Hook community, especially people like me that come from a small town who raise their children in a small town, and there's this presumption of safety. And what we found as a result of Sandy Hook was that our schools do not have a lot of the procedures in place, and they have sometimes some thinking procedures in place that may or may not help us in an emergency. And so I'm really proud to bring Michele to the airwaves today, because she has turned what had to be an unimaginable loss and tragedy. I know we all watched it nationwide. I'm in California, so we were all glued to the set, and everybody was praying in our church and our community for these families. But for you to turn around and take something like that and make it positive for the rest of us, really, Michele, I want to honor you for that. And I just want to express my thanks for your part in making our little school system here in Acton, California safer, because that's the ripple effect that you've had. And then you go on and you create safeandsoundschools.org so that we can learn and get involved and provide sports and be educated. I just think what you are doing is really vitally important, and I'm so happy to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much. That's such a great honor, from one mom to another. And it's just, to be honest with you, it's my daughter and me. She's never left me. So she really motivates me to get up, and not every day is as easy as some of the other days, or as easy as I would like it to be, but she gives me great purpose, and it really warms my heart to know that there are so many people out there who are working, who are taking our lessons learned and applying them to their own communities to ensure that their own children and their own staff members are as safe as they can possibly be in school.
Well, and, I like to think that Joey is with us today and, watching over us and watching over, all of our children as she leads us, as, the other children lead us into a different way of thinking about school safety. I know after Sandy Hook, out here in Southern California, a couple of the parents, I live in a community that has a lot of police and fire and military. And, there were, volunteer policemen that offered to provide security and for copycat crimes and things like that. And
Absolutely.
we all rallied together to provide the safe environment in the event that it would happen in our community. But realistically, we didn't know what to do, and people were talking about checklists and checkouts and do this and do that, and I thought about it like is that really what we need in an emergency, or is that just helping us feel safe that we did something? And, when I got onto Safe and Sound, your website, the first thing you talk about under your model is a way to rethink school safety. And I thought, wow, like, not only do you get it, like I know you get it because of what you've been through and what your family and your community's been through, but you turned around and you're starting to change. You're like a thought leader in school safety, that school safety is a process, not a product. And that's a very, very different way of thinking. And I'd like to open the show talking about that so that other educators, other parents listening today can benefit from a different way of thinking.
Yeah, and I think, the fact that I lived in schools, even before I was a mom, I was a teacher. I was an elementary school teacher, and before that, I was a preschool teacher's aide. So I think you learn what's needed. You learn the thought patterns that are so common in our school communities across the country. So I think that has been certainly something that I've been able to bring to the table, and that has helped in great part in the creating of these materials, is just understanding what is needed, and the types of people that serve in our schools every day, and the types of kids that are coming to our schools every day. We're all different. We're all unique for sure. But we don't operate the same as our law enforcement folks, as our emergency responders, as some of these people who warehouse all of this phenomenal information about emergency preparedness and readiness. But I'm pleased to hear about your own community and the rallying around, because you talked about this feeling of we don't know what to do. And of course, that's part of Safe and Sound, is to give people a place to go and a place to start. But it seems that what happened in your community is that's ideally where we would like to see everyone start. It's the rallying around. It's the coming together and using all of our strengths and our abilities and our hands to ensure the safety of our students, our staff members, and our communities overall. That in itself is an enormous first step for people. And we would like to see, we saw that in communities across the country. We'd like to see that sustained, because we really feel that ultimately, in a situation like we experienced in Sandy Hook, although it is statistically a rarity, and it is very unlikely that something like that happens in your community, it's everybody's worst nightmare. And when you've got all hands on deck, when you've got adults that are aware, community members that are aware, public servants, our protectors, if everyone, including students, has a greater level of awareness and readiness, we're that much safer. So I think that's you kind of got to the heart of the matter, and the inspiration that our children have given us to start Safe and Sound there.
Well, and I think, it goes much broader than what you're talking about. I think, there's a presumption of safety that we all have, in our little small communities, and we lock our doors and feel a presumption of safety. And we just have to acknowledge, I think, we can't put our head in the sand anymore. And I think that's one of the things that the news media has done with these, like up to the minute live unfolding reporting is allowing us not to put our head in the sand, allowing us not to say, oh, well, we're just a small town. It couldn't happen here. Sandy Hook showed us, yes, it can happen here, but the long reaching lessons that are learned from, this horrific experience and other experiences, that have happened around the country and really the world, is that it's preparedness for emergency situations. An emergency situation, yes, can be an armed shooter. It can be a wildfire, like here in California. It can be, and yes, some emergency situations have more preparedness time than others. You have more time to act. But the formula is the same, whether it's a tornado in Joplin, Missouri, whether it's a shooting, in Colorado or Connecticut, or, it's an earthquake in California. Emergency is as emergency does, sir. And to have your community be prepared there's emergencies everywhere. Look at what happened with, we've got a tsunami. And yes, we have time for some of these things, but the policies and the procedures that need to be put in place, the plans and the programs and the measures and the awareness of this, would you say it's very similar no matter what the emergency system is? There's certain commonalities.
Absolutely. And I think that that's because more than anything, preparedness is about mindset. So if you have a preparedness mindset for a fire emergency, like all of our schools nationwide have, and because of that, we haven't had a death in a school-related fire in over 56 years. That preparedness, that education, that's empowering to folks. Find me someone who is afraid when that fire alarm goes off in the school. Granted, there are folks who have had real life experiences with fire and they will have a traumatic background. That might be someone who is scared when they hear something like that, transpire even in drill format in their school. But for the most part, we've become completely used to this level of readiness, for example, with fire. If you have that kind of readiness mindset, there's no reason that you can't translate that into other areas of safety. And I think when we started Safe and Sound, we started there and we started thinking about, okay, what do we have? Like teachers across the country, when you meet a new student, you want to get your hands on that student. You want to learn about what they bring to the table. What are their talents? What are their strengths? What's working for them? What makes them comfortable? What inspires them? So we kind of approached it the same way, and we thought, what have we got to learn from? And out of that, and the many readiness models that are out there, we sort of boiled it down and decided that there are 3 steps to readiness, whether it's tsunami or earthquake or fire, whether it's approaching a car accident. There are 3 steps that we tend to look at in our preparedness, and that is assessment, action, and then auditing, checking our procedures, thinking about them, reflecting upon them, asking ourselves if indeed they are serving us as best they can, or if we need to adapt them. So we created the straight A school safety model based on those 3 steps of assessment, taking a look at what measures and practices, what features you have about your school and your staff and your community that are going to be helpful to you, and what are challenges for you. And that's that assessment step. Then the second step is act, and that is creating a plan of action based on what you decide are your vulnerabilities and weaknesses and where your strengths may be, what kind of resources you've got at your hands. And then that last step, of course, is, after you practice that plan, you want to be learning from it. You want to be thinking about it after you have a fire drill. You want to gather your class around. You want to gather the staff around and say, hey, what did you learn? And you might find that someone says, I couldn't get out the back door as we planned. So we had to go out another way. We had to adapt our plan. These are the kinds of things that cause us to have natural auditing moments, natural moments of reflection about our plans, whether they be for bullying or fire safety, for an environmental emergency, or what have you, an intruder like we experienced.
Well, and I like, I've been all over your site and I've looked at your stuff, and there's a couple things in here that really stand out really strongly for me as a parent. I live, Michelle, in a fire zone, huge fire zone. I live right next to the National Forest. So, if a fire is coming through, we're evacuating, and, we practice our evacuation, get the dogs in the car, get the kids in the car, grab X, Y, and Z. We've got our emergency bag, we've been evacuated, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. So that's important. And the first time, my kids were evacuated with me, the police come through and they blow their bullhorn and everybody's got to go. My younger one freaked out. He got so frightened. And I said, what, this is just what we do. We're practicing. And we always leave at the first, when the police tell us, before it becomes mandatory, we always go on voluntary.
Thank you.
But yeah, I don't wait. Believe me, I would go even before voluntary comes. I'm like, why bother?
Yeah.
But there's a thing in there that you put that's prepared, not scared. Now, when the big station fire happened, was it last year or the year before, which was an 18-mile fire line, and I looked out my house and we were surrounded by fire on three sides, and I'm like, okay, time to go, kids. And we got our stuff. We mobilized, we went. And there's a thing on there that you talk about prepared, not scared. Now, granted, it's a scary thing, but when you know what to do, like I have this little checklist in my office here. My office is in my home, and that's my evacuation checklist. And I'm like, we can be out of this house in like 10 minutes with, three dogs, three kids, an old man, and my computer stuff, because we're prepared. And when you're prepared, you don't do that like, oh my God, what do I do? Run around like a chicken with your head cut off. You can always be scared after, but you have to act. In an emergency, you have to act. You have to execute. These are non-negotiables. And in your case, they're non-negotiables between life and death. And so, my training as a lifeguard, many years ago, I was a lifeguard on Lake Michigan. They taught us to be prepared. Like there was a system in place, and you just execute the system, handle the problem, and then freak out later. And
I think I might have to make that into a new tool for us. Freak out later, be scared.
Yes.
But it makes such sense because that's what you're doing. You're basically telling your mind, we're not going to do the emotional thing right now. I'm turning that part of you off. And what we're going to do right now is we're just going to follow the steps that we've practiced. We're just going to engage the system that we have in front of us. And if you've ever been in any kind of emergency situation like the one you described, or gosh, just a couple weeks ago, I approached a car that had flipped over. And I pulled over to the side, and I had basic first aid training and CPR training. And I just made that little switch in my mind and got out, and everyone was fine, by the way. Everyone was absolutely safe. They were wearing their seatbelts. But my children were in the car, and when I got back in the car and everyone was taken care of, they thought I was a rock star, of course, but they marveled at the fact that I just went right into motion. And that's what it is, because it's okay too. Not everyone's going to go right into motion. Some people might need to freak out for a little bit. But then you remember, I have a system, I have a plan, I have a checklist, and it is incredibly empowering in even the most harrowing decisions and most harrowing situations.
Well, and you're dead on with this stuff, because you really can learn how to shelve your freak, put your freak out until after. And I'm the perfect one that I'm so great in a crisis, Michele. I'm so amazing in a crisis. And then 24 to 48 hours later, I am sitting at my kitchen table, shaking and crying and
yes.
But it's like you can actually move that. It's not like I'm any magic person or you're any magic person. You have an awareness, that this is possible. You learn how to switch it, because you literally just switch that part of yourself off that goes, what? I need to do this. And I think any mother who's raised children knows they have this capability, because
she knows that. I think people don't realize too. You don't necessarily teach yourself that. I mean, it certainly helps to practice it, but it is it's a human response in an emergency. You really are able to do that in many cases just on instinct.
Well, it's just on instinct, right? Like my little one, Michele, he had this really bad nosebleed, and he plugged his nose, and the blood came out as tear ducts. And I was raised, conservative Catholic as a little girl, and I'm like, oh my God, it's a stigmata, my child's breathing from the eyes, and I'm going through all these iterations, and I'm like, what do I do? What do I do? And then I'm like, okay. All right, we need to calm down. I need to get this one to the emergency room. I need to get this one. And every mother has been in that situation where the kid walks in, with something something bleeding, something, you cannot like freak
They
around
bleed
like,
a lot. They tend to bleed a lot, even just the littlest thing. And there's just always a lot of blood every time.
That's right. That's right. So we have this capability in us. So we have to kind of recognize it and honor it and make it part of our action plans within the school. Because I want to demystify some of this stuff because, when I was watching the safety stuff happen in our school district, people were like, well, we have to have this and we have to have that and we have to have, and it's like, but you know what? Without mindset, all of the systems fall down.
They do. They do. And that's, that ties in as well with another point that I like to make to people that, sometimes you can have the most expensive security gadgets or safety tools at your disposal, but if you're not trained to use them, to get them, if you're not prepared to use them, they're useless. And, and unfortunately in our situation, we had some great technological tools at our disposal. We had, like many schools, more than ever now, have a locked front door and have a buzz-in system. And, with permission from the office, you are buzzed into the building. But that technology failed us, and it failed us largely because we relied solely upon it. We did not empower ourselves with an entire, bucket of tools that we really could have made amazing use of that day. It could have made a big difference in the lives of a lot of people that day.
Well, and I think that's what your organization and your experience has spawned around the world is a conversation about our presumption of safety. Like I always laugh at the middle of the night. I still have to lock my door before I go to bed. Now, the only people that are going to come in the middle of the night most likely are coyotes and mountain lion. I live really rural. But my presumption of safety is I must lock my front door, I must lock my back door, my windows are shut, and that gives me a comfort level. But I think there's a point at which we have to examine our own comfort levels. And don't you agree?
Without a doubt, yeah. I mean, that your example is identical really to the example that we had with keeping our front door to the school locked and having a buzz-in system and having badges on the teachers. Those are wonderful things to implement for school-wide safety, and I recommend them in all school communities. However, those are for people like you and me. Those are for people who are already invested in safety and who do follow the rules and who value the safety of children over convenience. But unfortunately, we have to acknowledge that there are dangerous people, there are dangerous situations, and some of our practices really have to be examined. Some of our tools have to be examined for other scenarios.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when it's like you kind of go on this gamut thing of like, well, I don't know if I want to deal with this. I'm just going to pretend it's not going to happen here, and have that to like, oh my God, what do we do? Where do we begin? You kind of go from like head in the sand to overwhelm with this topic. I mean, realistically, when you're in a school district and you've got parents and you've got, products and you've got, school boards and you just got, there's so much to deal with. And what I love about your program is it's so simplified. Like, I can get on here and I can look and I can learn and I can, download a free toolkit. And start making some real changes that could have real results in the event of one of these situations. It's like I can see how much work went in this to make it clear.
Yeah, and I gotta thank all of the students and all of the teachers that I worked with over the years, because that's just what we did in our school every day. So it was, once I kind of honed in on the ideas and sat down with a lot of amazing national experts and local experts, and just people with experience in traumatic situations, it was kind of easy to go, okay, this is a wonderful 3-volume series that you've put together for us, but it's very overwhelming. And one of the greatest barriers we have toward making changes toward safer schools is fear. it is overwhelming, and it's hard to go there in your head. So we chose very specifically, and I was an elementary school teacher, so I just boiled it down to a very elementary level. And I thought, let's just give people bite-sized pieces of information. Let's not give them the entire volume. Let's give them a framework to start out with so that they can have the global picture at what we're trying to achieve here. But let's allow them to kind of pick and choose where they are. And one of our tools is the spectrum of security and safety awareness. And one of the most important things as a teacher and as a mother too is just being able to take the temperature, know where you are mentally, with regard to your mindset and your fears and your worries, and also the people around you, the people you work with, and the people that you serve, the students that come into your classroom every day, the kids in your carpool every day. Where are they in terms of their idea about safety? Are they feeling like, oh, we're easy breezy, we live in a lovely little suburb and we don't ever have to worry about bad things, bad people, or emergencies? Or are they freaking out because there was just a terrible tragedy announced on the news, and now they're in shutdown mode? We can't go outside. It's not safe to be a part of the world anymore. Those are really important things to be aware of in order to keep track of, where you want to go and where you want to be and how you want to get there. So I encourage everybody to think about that. Think about, where you are at any given point in terms of your safety awareness. Where are you mentally, and to think about how that helps or hinders you, in your efforts to do better in your community.
Well, and that's so important that you talk about this, because so much of your program doesn't require $1 million. Like, the biggest thing that schools face these days is money. You know what I mean? And it's like, the idea that you make your school a prison fortress. And, I hear all the debates in our local schools about, what do we do? How do we do it? How do we afford it? So many of these things just require me to talk to you, or the teachers to talk to each other, or the teachers to talk to the kids, to engage the students. Like, you put some great ideas, like engage them in a poster contest, reach out with area emergency management systems to come and invite the first responders to not only the planning table and the drills, but I would say invite them into the classroom. There's no reason. I see our fire guys going to Sam's Club and Costco to load up on supplies. They all come as a crew so they can leave, together. So come on over to the school and present to the kids, because all that kind of stuff, it makes a huge difference. And we haven't spent a dime at that point.
Exactly. They're already on the clock, they might as well spend a little time and have a little fun with us while they're on our campus. Let us pick their brains. Let us walk them through the school and say, what do you think about this? Or, do you see any things that we should work on or fix? It doesn't always have to be a big official assessment or evaluation that is done. Part of the natural audit is just creating that awareness, that always thinking, always checking, always looking to do better kind of mentality. And we've got in our communities phenomenal resources just in our fire folks, our EMTs, our medical personnel. We've got doctors and nurses that are parents, as well as school nurses. So you've always got a lot of resources available to you. I think that people often forget. They feel like, oh no, we're going to have to hire this firm to come out and do a professional assessment. That's wonderful, because you want to get as many eyes on the school and the plans and the procedures as possible. But you do have a lot, at your own fingertips that I think a lot of people forget about.
Well, or don't even think about. Like, that's the more important thing. I think you're right. Everybody goes to, okay, who can we hire to do this? Who can we pay to do that? And, when we really should think about, like, what do we have already in our own community that we can utilize? I mean, we pay our taxes for fire and police, so why can't they be a part of this? And, especially in a community where I live, where most of the parents are fire, police, or military.
Yeah.
It's like, how cool is that someone's so-and-so's dad came in and did this, and yes, it does require, coordination. It does require some phone calls, but at the end of the day, is it really costing you any money for the results you're going to get? And the results you're going to get are going to be astronomical with respect to the school safety strategies.
They are, and beyond that, I think people forget that it's a natural relationship in the community. And when you build those relationships and you start those conversations, they tend to continue when you run into each other at the supermarket or on the ball field. You start to realize the resources you have at your disposal. And then also our children, our students begin to realize the resources that they have at their disposal. We have a lot of community helpers, from all different types of disciplines that are available to our children. And they often don't realize, they don't realize the type of support they could find in a school resource officer or a coach. But when they see us working together in this type of model, that tends to change, and they realize that, they're consumers of safety as well, and they're a part of the team.
Absolutely. And then when our kids grow up, like the future firefighters and police and military, that we're exposed to as children, just like nurses and, career day. You think about career day. I don't even know if they do career days anymore. I haven't seen many of them.
They still do. And I always plug it. It's another opportunity to make use of the expertise in your community. Absolutely. Relationship building, sharing of resources. It's, in our younger ages, our elementary schools and our preschools, it's often like a safety fair model that we encourage, where you have all of those community helpers come in and the kids get to climb in the cruiser and touch the truck and dress the firefighter, and that's getting them acclimated and getting them prepared. Like you said, your younger child was freaking out when the emergency came to be, when you guys actually had to do a real evacuation. These are the types of activities that can prepare our kids for and familiarize them with the kinds of things and people that they'll see in an emergency. But those kind of safety fairs, they tend to get, they graduate as the kids move up in age in our schools. So you can use a type of career fair model, a different type of model that's a little bit more mature and reap the same benefits.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, we're talking about something that doesn't cost anything. What's the outlay for this?
Nothing. Yep.
And the worst thing that would happen with your emergency response is that they get called on a fire and you say, oops, sorry, guys, they had to go, take care of things. We'll do it next week. I mean, it's not like, that's any, big trauma. You know what I mean? It's like, what's the downside?
In fact, because that's happened. I've seen that happen many times in my teaching where we had an event plan like that and, an actual emergency began to unfold and law enforcement had to leave the presentation. The kids had even more awe and respect for them, I think, because they were, it was, okay, this is the real deal. These people really do live and breathe this. They do this for a living, and there's an emergency and they're being called for it. So that's just life, right? It's that level of preparedness.
It is. And, I was looking at some of the websites, or some of the statements on your website, and it's interesting to me because I look at the national average arrival response time to an emergency is 5 to 6 minutes. And I started chuckling because I'm like, in what neighborhood? I live in Los Angeles and I'm like, holy bananas. Like, we've had a couple of emergencies. I had a life flight land in the horse lot next to me. And I'm like, this family, got in their car, drove up to, it was a quad accident, but I'm like, these things, I mean, it was 45 minutes. I had a neighbor with a baby who was convulsing because of a high fever. And, our only option in Los Angeles out here is a life flight. And, the life flight came, but, the response time, that can be 35, 40 minutes in a rural community. And our country is built on a lot more rural communities than city areas with public services, 5 to 6 minutes away.
Absolutely. And I think, so the average helps us to give folks, just to help them realize that it's not a matter of calling 911 and then you're done and help miraculously appears 1 second later. But for some people like you, actually for a lot of people like you in rural areas, that help is going to be a long time coming. So there needs to be a lot done to prepare, for those window minutes. There's a lot that can be done to provide first aid for a child in need, like the one you're describing, or to secure the location if there happens to be an intruder in the school. So, it keeps our theme here keeps coming back to readiness and preparedness and education. But, a lot of people really, truly believe, and I think our community was one of them, and there's no fault in this. It's just that I think a lot of us believe, okay, in the emergency, I'm going to call 911. That's what I'm trained to do. And that's not enough. That's not training. We've trained folks to do one thing, but we haven't trained them for all of the other minutes until the professionals arrive.
Well, and I would like to, since I'm in the media, I always love to publicly challenge statistics because, realistically, when I look at population density and I look at that 5 to 6 minutes, I just would love to see if that really is accurate. I mean, I know it's a 2008 statistic. I'm not, knocking you at all for putting the statistic on your site. It's the Department of Justice's statistic. But I would love to sit in the Department of Justice office and call 911 and set my watch.
Well, because what else? What's interesting too is you can actually have this conversation with your local responders, and they're generally pretty honest with you about what the average response time is for them. I've had that discussion with our local responders, and for us, we're in a little bit more dense of an area, so it happens to be a very favorable response time. But it is really important to know that information because that affects the level of training and education and preparedness you need to have right there on the ground. And another example of it is, a lot of people get very upset when they hear about certain schools throughout the country who have chosen to explore the option of arming principals or staff or even hiring personnel that is trained with firearms for an active intruder kind of event like ours. And I think a lot of those folks are failing to realize that we do have so many communities out there that will be waiting for a very long period of time before help arrives on the scene. So I'm not advocating one way or the other, but I think it just points to a general ignorance, really, about the facts as they really are, and about how the facts can be very different in your community from the way they are in my community.
Well, and I'm so glad that you brought this up because, we live in a very rural mountain community. And so our statistics are going to be very different than somebody who lives like where I grew up in my little town outside of Clarence, New York. But then I also look at, Los Angeles congestion, New York City congestion. Yeah. It's like realistically, when the Department of Justice puts out a statistic like this, how on earth is it supposed to apply to rural New Mexico, downtown Chicago, Sandy Hook, Acton, California? We're all different. And what you're talking about, I think most importantly, with your Safe and Sound program is elevating that awareness, having that conversation, asking your responders what realistically is a first responder amount of time. Because I can tell you one time I asked my neighbor up the street 2 doors away is like a fireman, and across the street are a couple sheriffs. And I said, when you get a call from our neighborhood, for an emergency response call, I said, how long, does it take? And they laughed and they said, oh, the joke is we just wait for the shooting to stop before we come out. And, it was a tongue-in-cheek thing, but realistically,
sadly, it's a reality. It's not that they're waiting, but it sadly, it will likely be over by the time they arrive.
That's right. Right. Mm-hmm. Now, what was the response time, with respect to the Sandy Hook shooting? And again, this is not a judgment. This is a discussion of what is actually reality. We're not saying that the first responders are not responding, but realistically, we've got slippery roads, we've got traffic, we've got, trees down, we've got, news crews in the way. I mean, there's a million things that happen when people are trying to get through to help. Do you know what the typical response time was, or what was reported as the response time?
I don't retain numbers all that beautifully. A little bit of trauma brain left over, I think. But just a ballpark, it took a few minutes before staff members were able to even, snap themselves into action mode to call for help. So we had some staff members that called 911 on their cell phones because that's what they had. Most of our classrooms did not have a landline at all. And then we had a couple staff members that were able to get a call to 911 out on a landline. And the reason I bring that up is it's generally faster to call 911 from a landline because it will go directly to local dispatch. If you call 911 from a cell phone, your call will be taken care of. But if you've ever, made a phone call to the police, passing an accident or something on the road, you may have had this experience where you were routed through several different departments before your call actually went to the correct local agency. So it took a little bit longer for those calls to go through than we would have liked. And the lesson there is to test and really be thinking critically about communication systems and how many you have, what levels of redundancy you have. Do you have walkie-talkies? Do you have some kind of wireless communication with the police and the fire locally? Do you have several levels of communication available to you? So it was probably a minute and a half before any call was actually, or anyone was actually dispatched to the scene. And then it took about 3.5 minutes for them to get there. And so about the time that they were arriving, we had some local police arriving on the scene, and just about a second later, we had state police arriving on the scene. Then it took time for them to get the lay of the land. They did not have blueprints, floor plans, and they had to orient themselves to the scene. They had to try to figure out if there were any shots continuing to be fired. And when they first arrived on the scene, they did not hear anything. But later they began to hear more shots being fired. And it was really difficult for them to establish where the shots were being fired. So it took some time, longer than we would have liked for them to even enter the building. Somewhere around 10 minutes after that first call was made was about when the officers were able to make entry. And of course, at that time, our intruder was well aware that the professionals were there, and that's when he ended the massacre by ending his life. So it's a very complicated thing to examine the response time. I think everybody did the very best they could, and certainly rose to the level of their training and experience. And as we've done, unfortunately, over the decades with a lot of different types of tragedies, many of them school-based tragedies, we have honed and improved our responses. And law enforcement is generally the first to sit down at the table and look really critically at how they did and how they can do better. And it's not ever in the spirit of beating anyone up or saying, oh, I could have done a better job. It's just that they're very action-oriented people, and they always want to be improving their procedures and practices. So as I travel around the country, I speak with a lot of law enforcement professionals, and just about all of them are doing things differently. They've learned some lessons, and they're all looking to shrink that response time as much as humanly possible. But just as we were talking about a few minutes ago, one of the best ways to do that is to acknowledge that the people on scene are really the first responders. So even if it's me in my second grade classroom and there's not an officer on scene to help, or there's not a paramedic to help me with an injured child, there are some very basic things that I can do to maintain control and to increase the safety of everybody around me. So it's about those practical things. It's about empowering people with that knowledge and that training.
Well, and I love what you said. I just want to repeat that for our listeners because the first responders in something like this, you're right. They are the teachers. They might be the janitor. They might be the gym teacher or the French teacher. It's a sad, horrifying reality that those are the first responders to the situation, and that when you look at our law enforcement and police, they work in unimaginable situations under unimaginable odds. And yet we expect them, the teachers and the first responders, the medical personnel and the police, to come and know what to do. And in your case, I can't imagine there wasn't really a whole lot of precedent set that we have today. We have a lot of luxury today based on the tragedy that happened in your community, because we have the ability, and I call it a luxury because my community hasn't faced that, and we learned the lessons from your community. So it truly is a luxury that we can't deny.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that kind of struck me as you and I were having this conversation too is just another very simple idea that's incredibly powerful in these conversations that we hope to be facilitating in communities across the country between, teachers and law enforcement and fire professionals and parents and all of these school safety stakeholders. One of the greatest things you can do to improve the safety of your school is just to have a conversation with the professionals that you've got, with those emergency responders, to say, hey, I just want you to know I'm not trained anywhere near your level, but I'm on your team. So I want to know, can you give me 2 or 3 things that I can do in an emergency to make your job easier, to make you more successful? Obviously, we're all in it for the same thing. We want everyone to come out safe and alive. We want to mitigate loss and tragedy and trauma. So what are some things that I can do while I'm waiting for you to come? And you'd be surprised at some very simple things that even a lay person can do that can drastically increase, survival rates, empowerment, and psychological safety. Giving people something constructive to do while they are waiting for help to arrive can be something that reduces trauma. So these are just, simple conversations, but they can be incredibly powerful to have.
Hugely powerful. And I want to invite everybody listening today to go to safeandsoundschools.org, because there's so many great things on there. There's a webinar coming up about rethinking school safety. And, you're even offering people to win a tablet to get them to come. To me, it's unconscionable that people, educators would not come to this, but I appreciate you offering a tablet for people who go.
I'm lucky. I don't have a tablet to give out, but we have a wonderful sponsor that is putting together the webinar. So I will give the webinar, obviously, but they've been generous enough to put the webinar together, to promote it, and to provide that gift to really try to encourage people to come. And just like all of our materials, it's free. We really feel that knowledge should be free and should be freely shared, and that's a big part of our mission at Safe and Sound.
Absolutely. And who is that sponsor so we can honor them today?
Wonderful. Yeah, that's Crisis Go. And they actually specialize in a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about today, really trying to shrink that response time by making it better informed and increasing communication in an emergency.
So yay, Crisis Go. We want to thank you for providing that Android tablet. We want to encourage you guys, when you shop at Amazon, you can get Amazon to make a donation for stuff that you're already shopping for, which is, again, a no-brainer. So go to Amazon Smile, or go, and look up Safe and Sound, a Sandy Hook initiative, or, you can click right on the Safe and Sound website there. It's right on the front page. So, and check out their upcoming events, because this stuff is free, you guys. And free here doesn't mean no value. Free means incredible value to handle an incredibly, unbelievably, just unbelievable situation that is facing our nation right now. So we really want to make sure that you take advantage of this. And it's my honor, Michele, to say that I will use all the resources behind my company, my technology company, to get this show that we shared, this time we shared today, in the hands of 100,000 or more downloads within 90 days. I give that promise to you.
Thank you so much for spreading the word. That's fantastic. And you're absolutely right. This has been kind of a grassroots mission that has grown, and we've been able to provide all of these free resources because of the level of support we have from ordinary moms, from teachers, from law enforcement officers, through donations and sponsorships, and through speaking engagements as well. We do an awful lot of speaking around the country, so we're very grateful. Honestly, our children have left us in a position of power and inspiration, and we keep them with us in everything that we do to try to help other communities. Thank you.
Absolutely. Michele Gay, you've been an outstanding guest today. On behalf of my children, I would like to thank your children for making our world a better place. I know that Josephine is with us and part of us, and your girls, your other two girls, and I'm sorry, I can't remember their names off the top of my head. Can you give them?
Yeah, Sophia and Marie, they've been very patient. They just got off the bus and they're having their snack quietly.
Very patient. Well, very patient while mommy works on this cause, very patient with their own grief and adjustment, with the loss of a child. I have my very dear friend lost her son to pediatric brain cancer a couple years ago, and I've watched what the siblings have had to do to adjust. So I want to honor Sophie and your daughters for their part in this and for allowing you as their mom to do this, because I know that means sacrificing of waiting missing you when you're working. There's so much that goes into what you're doing for other people's children. So I want to thank your children for helping my children.
Oh, I will share that with them. That will mean a tremendous amount to them. Thank you.
Okay, well, our guest today has been Michele Gay. Her program, safeandsoundschools.org. Check it out. Tell your children's teacher, tell the principal, tell anyone you can that there are free resources on this site that can help you instigate free changes and ability for your school to become safer, or your institution. A lot of this stuff, you guys, works for soccer camps and baseball fields. I mean, there's so many good things in here. I want you to check it out. I want you to spread the word. I want you to tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your teachers, tell everybody you can think of. If everybody listening today would tell 3 people about this program, we could reach 300,000 people in 90 days. So I put that challenge out to you. I thank you, Michele Gay. I'm sending a blessing right now to Josephine and the other victims of Sandy Hook, as well as the other victims in school shootings around the world today. This is Sandra Beck from Motherhood Talk Radio. The website, safeandsoundschools.org. Check it out.
Thanks for being with us today on Motherhood Talk Radio, starring Sandra Beck. Motherhood Talk Radio brings you interesting, influential, and inspiring guests to help you be all you can be. Everything from great parenting tips to moms living with cancer, starting a family, or starting a business. Making the most of how you bounce back with style. Join us next week for another great guest you won't want to miss here on Motherhood Talk Radio, live every Tuesday afternoon on Toginet.com.